My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs and Co, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking now. Have you seen the news? 87-year-old man on a mobility scooter murdered in broad daylight in London. I mean, every now and again there's a crime, isn't there, that happens that makes you literally stop what you're doing and reflect. That, for me, has been this today. It's got me pondering, are we in lawless Britain? Have the police lost control of the streets? Did they even have it in the first place? Some might question. You tell me. And also, Russian tourists, should they be allowed to travel freely? At the moment, within some parts of the EU, the answer to that is no. And it's got me wondering, should your everyday citizen really be held fully responsible for the actions of their governments? You tell me. And of course, we've seen the attack on Salman Rushdie. You've still, by the way, got a teacher in Batley in hiding. And it's got me pondering tonight, is it okay to criticise religion? Any religion, all religion? Are there any boundaries to that? Yes or no? Some people say that the UK should have blasphemy laws. Really? We'll have all that to come, and keeping me company, Peter Hitchens and Frank Freddy. I'm looking forward to this. But first, let's bring ourselves up to date with tonight's latest headlines.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Inflation is rising at its fastest pace in 40 years. The Consumer Price Index rose to 10.1% in July from 9.4% in June. Rising food prices are believed to be making the biggest impact. Speaking after the latest hustings in Northern Ireland, Prime Ministerial hopefuls Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss said they have the right plans for the economy.
Well, today's inflation figures show how serious the situation is. Inflation is the enemy. It makes everyone poorer, it destroys jobs, it eats into people's pensions and savings, and it pushes up mortgage rates. As I've consistently said, inflation is the greatest challenge facing the new Prime Minister. Now, I have the right plan to get a grip of inflation, to support the people who most need our help with the cost of living, and to grow our economy so that we never have to deal with this again.
What I'm not going to do on this show is predict a future budget, but what I can assure people is this is an urgent issue and I will make sure it's dealt with. Ultimately, I want a high-wage, high-growth economy. The fact is we've had 2 decades of low growth in this country. I will not continue with business as usual. I will be bold in making the change we need to help people right across our country.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer believes the government has lost control of the economy.
You've got a stark contrast here, a zombie government doing absolutely nothing to keep inflation down, and we keep seeing it creep up. A Labour Party that says, here's a plan not only to freeze energy prices this autumn, which is going to cause many people to struggle, but also bring inflation down by 4%.
In other news, an elderly man who was stabbed to death while riding a mobility scooter has been named as 87-year-old Thomas O'Halloran. Police are describing the attack in Greenford, West London, as a shocking act of unprovoked violence. Detectives have released images of a man fleeing the scene, armed with a knife, who they want to speak to as a matter of urgency. He's described as wearing grey shorts, a dark T-shirt and a white baseball cap. Former Labour MP Stephen Pound told GB News he knew the victim and he was well liked in the community.
Tom was a real character, a real local character. He used to be outside Greenford Station playing the accordion, sometimes and occasionally a harmonica, but usually an accordion. And he was absolutely, you see the smile on the face of him. He was a sweet, sweet, lovely man. The brutality, the cruelty, or the apparent random nastiness and the evil of his death actually really is corrosive to us. And it's going to take a while for us to recover.
Survivors of the infected blood scandal will be given £100,000 in compensation, the government has announced. It's the first time that victims will receive payments after 4 decades of campaigning. 2,400 people died after being infected with HIV and hepatitis C in the 70s and 80s. Cristiano Ronaldo has been cautioned by police after appearing to knock a phone out of an Everton fan's hand at a match in April. Merseyside police launched an investigation after video footage of the incident at Goodison Park was circulated online. The Man United player was interviewed under caution following an allegation of assault and criminal damage. The 37-year-old also issued a social media apology, inviting the supporter to watch a game at Old Trafford. Rail, tube and bus passengers face fresh travel disruption over the next few days as tens of thousands of staff walk out in disputes over pay and conditions. Members of the RMT, TSSA and Unite unions will be involved in the action. Tomorrow and Saturday, only a fifth of overground services will run as staff working for Network Rail and several other train operators strike, along with London United bus drivers. Meanwhile, on Friday, London Underground and buses in the capital will be hit again by walkouts. Network Rail's chief negotiator says the strikes damage the industry as well as passengers.
I think it's sad for the railway, 5 days of industrial action, 6 on Saturday, and it's unnecessary. This is the point. It will not improve the offer. We need to modernise the railway because of the fact that our costs are too high and the number of passengers we're carrying has reduced. We can only do that by negotiation and by agreement. It's very difficult to do that just on our own.
More strikes and Royal Mail workers have voted in favour of industrial action in a dispute over terms and conditions. The Communication Workers Union said the decision of its members was overwhelming. It follows a separate planned strike over pay, with 4 days of walkouts scheduled for later this month and in September. Parts of the UK have seen torrential rain after weeks of intense heat waves. Areas in London, including Stoke Newington in the borough of Hackney, have experienced flash flooding. Earlier, the Met Office issued an amber weather warnings for the southeast of England, saying fast-flowing floodwater could be a danger to life. Yellow weather warnings cover central and southern England and South Wales. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Back now to Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Ray. Well, keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight. My panel, I've got the columnist for the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, and the author and academic, Frank Furedi. Helen was one of my first emails tonight. She said, "Dear Michelle, what fabulous guests you have this evening. So good to see both of them." She did also go on there and say, they put many of your other guests to shame. I wasn't going to read that bit out. I like all my guests. Yeah, I did in the end. I did contemplate there, Peter, for a couple of seconds. Then I thought, you know what? No, I'll just read the whole thing out. I love all my guests, but yes, looking forward to the conversation tonight. You know the drill as well on Dewbs & Co. It's not just about us here, it's about you at home as well. I always like to know what you think about the stories that we are covering. Get in touch with me, GB News, gbnews.uk is the email address. You can tweet me at GB News or at Michelle Dewbs. I want to talk to you tonight about crime in the UK. Have we lost control of the streets? Did we ever even have it, by the way? I want to ask about in the situation in Russia. and Ukraine, the conflict there. Should ordinary Russians be punished for the actions of their governments? I'm asking you that tonight. And should we have blasphemy laws in the UK? Lots of you have been in touch already. I'll start on the crime one because I'm going to lead with that story today. Jonathan has emailed in saying, Michelle, I've been a police officer for 25 years now on the front line. We have lost the streets. We have lost the support and confidence of the public. We have focused on work issues and not mainstream crime that people want us to tackle. This has occurred, he says, because we've had weak, ineffective police leadership, sycophants and non-operational officers managing from behind a desk. He goes on. Taking your time with this one, John. He says the criminal justice system is completely broken. We cannot repair it unless we have radical change. We've lost control, he says, again, of our streets. His colleagues are leaving in record numbers, and he ends by saying, thank goodness, I will be leaving too in the next few years. That's John, a serving police officer there for nearly quarter of a century. The reason I read that one first is because this is the story that I want to lead on. We've just been hearing in the news headlines, haven't we, about that awful situation, about the murder of a man that's almost 90 years old in a mobility scooter in London. Police have revealed the image of the suspect wanted for questioning. I've got to say, thank goodness we debate often things like CCTV and doorbells and all the rest of it. People often say we've got a bit of a big brother society, but when I see very clear imagery like that of someone that's wanted for questioning, I celebrate them, quite frankly. I think it's a good thing, these doorbells and CCTVs and all the rest of it. And I hope whoever knows this person comes forward. Appalling. I have to say, though, it's the 6th murder investigation launched in 4 days in London. It's not just in London, by the way, because I know many of you will be sitting there going, this is just a London thing. We've not lost control of the UK. It's just London. But actually, there's been a rise in distribution of drugs right across major cities, right through to rural areas. And it's just, I'll get to the point, Frank Ferretti, I'll start with you. The state of Britain, it feels like, anyway, we have lost control when it comes to law and order.
We need a sense of perspective because random crimes like the one we're discussing, the murder of this old gentleman, is fortunately still fairly rare. But I think you're right, there's something amiss. And worse still, we're very reluctant to openly discuss some of the real difficulties that we're facing. I think the first problem that we have is that community solidarity has broken down, so there is very little social restraint, particularly young people in our societies. Kids, become a lot unto themselves because the adult world often gives up on disciplining them, and therefore they just basically very easily move into the domain of crime without blinking an eyelid. And then to make matters worse, we have a criminal justice system that really doesn't understand the meaning of justice and kind of struggles to understand what justice means, so that the police are very often wasting their time ticking boxes, sitting around. I remember going to a police station 2 years ago, and literally there were 5 or 6 coppers just kind of ticking boxes rather than being out on the street. And when I asked them, well, is your life? And they said, well, this is process, this is something that we got to do. But worse still, I think that there's a kind of acquiescence to the fact that certain crimes will not be investigated. We acquiesce to the fact that certain parts of London and other parts of the country are in effect no-go areas where the police very rarely wander in there. And certain communities in particular, and certain parts of London are very much at high risk in terms of the commitment of crime. So one of the things that I would like us to see is to have a grown-up discussion about what is this situation that we're faced with, because it's not good enough to talk about the breakdown of law and order. I think we've got to investigate a little bit further and name names and isolate the problem.
Yeah, and I just want to, just before I bring Peter Hitchens in, because whilst it's this particular crime that stopped me in my tracks today, let's be absolutely clear, this is just one of many things that's going on at the moment that makes me very much concerned. I mean, I don't know if TikTok is your thing. Got to be honest, it's not quite mine. But I do use social media nonetheless, so I see a lot of things. This is one of the things that caught my eye. If I can get this clip running today. Yeah, I mean, I'm showing, because I know that some of you are listening, not watching. This is, I've got to be honest, what I can only describe as lawless Britain in action. you got a collection of young people, I guess. They're just kind of running amok on the streets. Again, you guessed it, London. They're diving into like a sweet shop, filling their pockets to their heart's content, and out they go again, absolutely not paying for a thing. Sadiq Khan issued a statement saying, "I'm concerned about a potential increase in violence this summer as the cost of living crisis deepens and threatens to reverse the progress I know we have made in tackling violent crimes." I mean, I laughed a little bit when I read that, Peter Hitchens, because I can almost see it coming, this kind of, oh, it's not my fault, it's not the police's fault, it's a cost of living crisis. I mean, shut up. What do you think?
Well, it's unlikely that people are going to rush in and steal sweets from a sweet shop because the cost of living has risen. It's also remarkable when so many of these supposed riots happen that the buildings that get targeted are so often selling high-end electronic goods, which are obviously an important need that is unfulfilled in the lives of these people, but you can hardly claim it was a real piece of serious social deprivation. During the last supposed riots in London, I can't remember how long ago they were now, I pointed out that this was basically an outbreak of crime. It wasn't riots at all. It was people realising the streets were unpoliced. And
You're on about when it was Mark Duggan, the killing of Mark Duggan.
Property was unprotected. And it wasn't, to say, there was no social protest. It was simply a realisation by the lawless that they could get away with anything. Fortunately, they haven't yet realised just how few defences there are. Many years ago, working for newspapers, you see the same stories coming round over and over again, the horrible murder of an old man, the increased instance of drug abuse, whatever it may be. And I thought, well, there's no point just writing this over and over again and writing a column saying how terrible it is. I will look into what's actually happened. And I spent a couple of years researching and writing a book called A Brief History of Crime, in which I discovered in detail what had happened to the police, what had happened to the courts, what had happened to criminal justice in general, and what had happened to the prisons. And I tried to press this book, sometimes directly into the hands of senior police officers and politicians, say, please, will you read this, because everything you say about more bobbies on the beat and crackdowns on crime is empty rubbish. It has no bearing on what's going on. You're paying no attention to the real problem. And I've never got any response at all. There is no interest in most of the media. There's no interest in the world of politics. There's almost total ignorance. You hear it. I'll be listening to some politician of any of the parties. What we need is more bobbies on the beat. And the moment this person says this, you know that he doesn't know or she doesn't know anything. There hasn't been such a thing as a bobby for about 50 years, and there is no beat for them to go on. The police do not patrol on foot preventively, which is their job. They stop doing it. What we have are paramilitary social workers, heavily armed with clubs and pepper sprays and sometimes guns, reacting to crime and disorder after it has happened uselessly. They've been doing this uselessly and with increasing ineffectiveness now for coming up for half a century. Nobody will reform it. I can say this over and over again. I can say it here, I can say it to you, I can say it when I meet politicians, I can say it to other journalists. Nobody pays the slightest bit of attention. There is no interest in this country in serious political discussion of major issues such as this, so it goes on getting worse. Same with drugs. Now, you would find probably that drug abuse lies behind an enormous number of the crimes which you report and grieve over.
What do you think?
But nobody will do anything about it. There is absolutely no intention to reduce the use of drugs. It's very easily done. They do it in Japan. They prosecute people for possession of drugs. And so there's much less possession of drugs and much less use of them. We will not do that here. We dismiss it as a policy from the outset. And if you say it, people attack you as a mad prohibitionist. There is no appetite in this country for serious discussion about this or any other problem. And it's extraordinary how long we've continued down this slope of idiotic non-government by people who don't know and don't care about their own country.
Frank?
Yeah, well, I mean, that ship has sailed as far as drugs are concerned because, unfortunately, they become totally normalized. And they become normalized not just amongst sort of people who live in underprivileged circumstances, but also within the middle classes and also amongst our elites, where the use of drugs is seen as just cool, just a normal thing you do. But I think the real problem...
Well, hang on a second. Drunken driving was normal and normalised in this country in the middle 1960s. And a serious effort was made to stamp it out with the breathalyzer, and it's coming back again now because the police have abandoned traffic patrols more or less totally. But in the years after the introduction of the breathalyzer in '67, proper serious prosecution and pursuit of a dangerous crime, it was reduced. You can do it.
There's a difference between...
You mustn't give in and say it's been normalised.
Well, it's been normalised. It's a fact of life.
You can denormalise it.
Well, you can denormalise it, but the trouble that we face is that it's precisely the people who are making decisions about criminal justice who actually believe that drugs are not a big problem, or they think that it's an overstated problem.
Yes, but Frank, there is much in what you say, but here is the problem. There are many, many people who will be listening to what I say saying this is true. The police officer who you quoted from the start, more or less, I think, probably agrees with me on most issues. There are probably millions of people who feel this way. They have no access to politics because in this country we keep on and on maintaining an existence to corpse political parties which represent nobody but themselves, only survive on the basis of state aid and billionaire contributions. And what we need in this country is serious new politics in which these things are actually discussed. If we don't do that, very soon, then these crises will become insuperable. But it is possible that we might do it.
The political situation obviously is at the roots of this, but we can't really put everything in the pot and try to kind of stir it and come up with a solution. The problem that we have is that the police at the moment, in relation to crime, is not only not proactive, it's actually passive. So, for example, the riots that was discussed earlier on was very interesting, was that when you saw the rioters in Wood Green and elsewhere, there was no police at all. I mean, the police basically withdrew and allowed the rioters to get on with things. And there's a kind of tacit complicity on the part of people involved in law and order not to maintain the order when push comes to shove. And it seems to me that what we have is a very cowardly, risk-averse police force that's being educated and socialized into passivity and to avoiding the making of difficult decisions. And we've seen this in a number of different circumstances. And it seems to me that we've got to get back to the beginning and ask the question, how do we create a police force and a system of justice that is much more robust and is much more committed to tackling crime and is much more committed to the communities that they serve rather than just being narrow professional in their work.
Let's return to the idea that people are responsible for their own actions. If you have the Mayor of London saying that social conditions are responsible for crime, then you immediately have people in important positions encouraging the idea that there is an excuse in this incredibly rich society for people to go out and rob their neighbours. There is no excuse for
obviously it's observed that poverty is linked to crime. I mean, we know, for example, that during the Depression in the 1930s, when there was mass unemployment, people didn't say, oh, I'm unemployed, therefore I'm going to rob somebody.
Absolutely not.
That's not how people are. Crime is quite distinct and is driven by motives and aspirations that are quite separate from economic conditions. And I think what's really dangerous, what Sadiq Khan is really doing, is he's creating a situation where the normalization of crime becomes institutionalized, where in a few years' time, the police will only be tackling certain kinds of crimes, the ones that are relatively easy to kind of solve, rather than the ones that people on the streets are confronted with.
You say in a few years' time, I would say that happened some time ago.
Well, yeah, he says some time ago. David just emailed in saying, Michelle, you're asking, is Britain out of control? He says, put simply, yes, and it has been since the 90s. Lots of people, I mean, Juliet's saying, this all makes me wonder why underage boys in the First World War volunteered to give up their lives for this country. It makes me despair. She says she thinks it was all a waste of decent lives, and it makes me, she says, glad that I am 82 years of age. How sad. Bernard says the youth of today are proving they do not respect age. More and more pensioners are getting assaulted. The punishments when people do go to court don't seem to be a deterrent, and around we go. Get in touch with me. What do you think to that topic? And what do you think about the police? Are you a serving policeman? I mean, or a police person, woman, whatever the terminology is these days, I don't know. Are you in the police force? What do you think to what you're hearing? Do you think that you are able to do your job effectively? Do you, I don't know, get bogged down with too much paperwork and all the rest of it? Get in touch. Let me know your thoughts. gbviews@gbnews.uk is my email address. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to ask you just how How responsible do you think your average person is for the actions of their government? The reason I ask this is because many countries in the EU right now are banning Russian tourists. Why? Because, of course, the actions of their government. Is that really the right approach? You tell me, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight. The panel that have been described by Peter as the A-team. The A-team, there you go. Who am I referring to if you've just joined me? Well, the columnist for the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, and the author and the academic, Frank Furedi. I've got to say, in short, many of you are in contact about that last conversation, which is, I was asking you, do you think Britain is pretty much lawless at the moment? Most of you, in summary, think that yes, it feels like it is. You can keep your thoughts coming on that. Bob says the police force and the police policies in this country are totally shot. Why do we have to keep paying our police for this level of service? And this is what I was asking. Are any of you out there serving police officers? What do you think to some of the criticism that comes your way? Is it fair or not? You tell me. Right, let's move on, shall we? New sanctions against Russian citizens are planned by the EU. Politicians are debating a ban on tourist visas for the Russians. This is, of course, amid the Ukraine war. 10 EU countries, including Belgium, Czech Republic, Latvia and Spain, have already suspended or restricted visas to Russian citizens. Where do you stand on this? I'll start with you, Peter Hitchens. Do you think your ordinary Joe public should be held responsible for the actions of their government in this way?
Grotesque xenophobia, and I'm shocked that President Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader, has been promoting this idea. The idea that every Russian supports the Russian state and the lawless and unforgivable invasion of Ukraine is simply false. The other thing is, I lived in the Soviet Union before it became Russia, and when it was very difficult for Russians to travel abroad, it was only the privileged nomenclatura class could generally leave the country at all, let alone with their families. And suddenly, one of the great liberties which came with the collapse of communism was this freedom to travel. And the influence this had on Russians, those who were able to do it, and many, many of them were, was huge. They saw, for the first time, other free societies, how they operated, how people lived, things they'd never really been allowed to see or experience before. And it had a great impact on them. I would think probably the Russians who travel are the ones who are least likely to be slavish supporters of the regime. And in any case, collective punishment of an entire nation, forcing them to stay within their borders, it's a disgraceful form of behaviour. It's outlawed under the Geneva Convention in some circumstances, and in general, it's a very poor principle to work on. I mean, you remember you went to the sort of school where if somebody did something wrong, everybody was kept in and threatened until one person confessed. It is a completely unjust way of treating people. And it's part of this strange, Ukraine is a sainted, wonderful nation of people who never do anything wrong and everything's perfect there. And Russia is Mordor and everybody is an orc and they're all evil and deserve to be punished. This is rubbish. The world is not like this. All countries contain good and bad people. And to punish people for things which they have had absolutely no part in bringing about is stupid and wrong and counterproductive, and will make it far, far harder when we eventually have to have peace, which we will, and sooner the better in my view, far, far harder to obtain it, and it'll make the peace a less satisfactory one when it comes. I think it's quite wrong. I think people should be much more noisily against it than they are. People who in this country have their faces correctly set against xenophobia of all kinds are missing this instance of it and should be speaking out against it.
You mentioned Zelensky. Zelensky actually said in an interview with the Washington Post that, I quote, the most important sanction that the EU could impose on Russia was to close the borders because, he says, the Russians are taking away someone else's land. He added that Russians should live in their own world until they change their philosophy. In Latvia, by the way, not only do they have an interview when you're trying to get in, but you're expected to sign a document now saying that you oppose the situation in Ukraine. Where do you stand on it all, Frank?
Well, I mean, Latvia is an extreme case of oppressive behavior towards the Russian minority there. Because one of the things they're doing is they're basically threatening to take away their passports and their basic legal rights unless they make a declaration about supporting the Latvian government and distancing themselves from Russia. And I think that kind of almost authoritarian behavior is fast becoming a norm in many of the states in the Baltic areas. And I support Ukraine unambiguously, but I do think that there is something wrong. It's against natural justice to punish ordinary Russian people for the actions of their government. And not only is it wrong, morally wrong, but it's also counterproductive because Russian people, Russian tourists, when they come to England or they come to Germany, they begin to talk to us, they begin to have a greater clarity about the situation. And I think that kind of dialogue that occurs in the course of tourism can only help resolve matters in the long run, because sooner or later this war will have to come to an end. And we don't want to create a situation where ordinary Russian people are made to feel like some kind of enemy, as if they're like the 21st century equivalent of the Nazis in the past. So I do think that we need to take a step back and realize that we're not going to improve matters by becoming so hysterical that we lose sight of the fact that ordinary people have got to be treated as just that, ordinary people. And we have to somehow find a way of fighting for the right of Ukraine to be independent and for their self-determination in a much more civilized way.
Peter?
Well, there's a growing tendency in the treatment of foreign conflicts in what we could loosely call the West of making out that one side is wholly bad and the other side is wholly good, which I think makes it almost impossible in a democratic state for people to develop a sensible view of what should be done. This happened also in Yugoslavia. The Serbs undoubtedly did some terrible things as Yugoslavia was breaking up, but so did the Croats. But it was all concentrated on the Serbs, and the whole thing was everything, all foreign policy, all discussion was based on the wickedness of the Serbs, and the resulting non-settlement, which still exists in Yugoslavia, it could blow up pretty much at any minute, was the result of this silly, childish view of everyone on one side is good, everyone on the other side is bad. In the Ukrainian issue, it simply is not true that the matter is as simple as that. And the idea that it is prolonging the war, making it harder to find a peaceful solution, and therefore leading to more deaths, more people being driven from their homes, more extended misery, and more economic disaster. We're in a very bad economic position anyway, thanks to the panic over COVID, where Rishi Sunak basically busted the economy in a total overreaction to a disease. And now we're doubling the damage by entering this and pursuing and perpetuating this conflict, which ought to be brought to an end, and which under normal circumstances civilized nations would be seeking to bring to an end. But if you constantly say this enemy is so terrible that we can't even let his citizens travel out of his country, how are you going to get peace?
Well, I mean, the situation is never black and white, as Peter suggests, and it's not the case that on the one side you have angels and on the other side you got the devil, but we do have to make a judgment call. And the judgment call that I would make is that on balance, Russia is the guilty party here, and Ukraine needs to be defended because their right as a nation is at issue here. And the issue for us now is that given the fact that this terrible war has been going on for months and months and months, what can we do to find some kind of resolution, or at least to contribute to some kind of resolution to this problem? And it seems to me that the challenge that we face at the moment is if we don't want to create what began as a war between Ukraine and Russia initially into a proxy war whereby people just end up ganging up on Russia because it's now very, very convenient. And all the while...
Frank, the coverage of this is cartoonish. I mean, for instance, there's this very strange problem going on at the moment over the Zaporizhia nuclear power station, in which an awful lot of Western coverage is saying, well, it's absolutely terrible, this power station is being shelled. Well, the fact is the power station is under the control of the Russians. They took it in February and they're hunkered down in it. So who's shelling it? Is it the Eskimos who are shelling it? Is it the North Koreans who are shelling it? I don't think so. But nobody will even say that the Ukrainians are shelling it, because shelling a nuclear power station is obviously, whatever you think about the issue, it's obviously a stupid thing to do. But nobody will say that the Ukrainians are shelling it.
But why?
That
Why do you think that is?
Because there is absolutely no ability among most of the people writing about this to see that there is any complexity in the conflict at all. The Ukraine, it's Gandalf versus the orcs. The Ukrainians are wholly good in white shining armor, and the Russians are wholly wrong. And and having once reached that stage, you can't even think about the subject anymore.
But I mean, the real problem that we have is that
there was provocation.
There's a war of propaganda going on, where essentially it's very difficult to know what is true and what isn't true, and that goes for both sides. Because in any war, you're trying to demoralize your enemy, and you're trying to get the maximum support for yourself. And when I went to the Ukraine in March to kind of find out for myself what was really going on. One of the things that really surprised me is that the Ukraine that I saw and the way that people experienced the war was obviously very different than if you just merely watch television. And that's the case in all kinds of wars. And I think what that means is that we have to take a step back and really critically assess every bit of information that we get at the moment and try to kind of work out for ourselves what is true and what isn't. And that's going to be very, very difficult because so many people are involved in creating an image that they want to present to us. And
but again, if a huge part of the animus against the Russians, quite correctly, is against the increasingly dictatorial nature of their government. And yet you've just described the Latvian state behaving in a way demanding signed loyalty declarations from citizens, which any of us under normal circumstances would look at with horror. And imagine our own government coming and demanding signed declarations of loyalty. It's a complete breach of any sort of freedom at all. And yet this is supposed to be a democratic NATO ally. Why aren't we more worried about this? Because one of the directions in which this kind of thing leads is towards a totalitarian mindset and indeed a totalitarian society brought in with popular support.
But then at the end of the day, I think you're right. We do need to be questioning what's happening in Latvia and also some other places. But somehow we've got to do it in such a way that we defend Ukraine as the party that's been attacked, that whatever problems exist with Ukraine, they need our support, and we've got to find a way to ensure that they get durable peace and durable security guarantees so that they can maintain themselves as an independent nation. I think that seems to me to be the number one priority.
There was a huge search for those guarantees before this war began and the Minsk II agreement was reached, which the major Western powers made no effort whatsoever to enforce. And if we're going to go into this is much more complicated than it's being portrayed as. The war began not in 2022 but in 2014, and has been raging in the Don Basin ever since then. And it's not as simple as the Russians invaded in 2022. That's it. But I never, if I try and make these points, I find not that I get, which I do, I find I get more and more isolated as the thing goes on, because the public mindset is more and more totalitarian. Almost everything anybody hears is all one-sided and all without real consideration of the facts, and also actually fantastically, profoundly ignorant.
But I mean,
of circumstances.
People are relatively open-minded about being convinced. I think you make an important point, which is that the West was not particularly sort of had empathy for the security needs of Russia earlier on, and they kind of ignored some of the concerns that Russia had. I think that's without a doubt the case. The problem is that doesn't excuse Russia's invasion of Ukraine. No,
it doesn't excuse it.
So now we're dealing with an event rather than what happened in the past. We got a situation at hand, which is for the first time since the war in Yugoslavia, we got a major war on the European continent, and it's a war that could easily spread elsewhere. That's what I really worry about. That this war isn't going to necessarily stop in Ukraine, but can easily spread to the Baltic states.
So everybody should be saying, well, where is the United Nations? Where are the peace talks? Why isn't anybody trying to?
I wouldn't want to count on the United Nations very much.
So big that nobody was trying to end before.
Yeah.
And that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Where are the peace talks? Where are the policies, the strategy, the people yelling from the rooftops that what we need in this situation is an end? You tell me. That one has divided opinions, by the way. Looking at your comments as they're coming through, lots of people agreeing with some of the things they're hearing, disagreeing with some of the things they're hearing. This is what I want. I think that it's not... It's never a good thing, is it, to have every single person in agreement? One of the problems in society at the moment is people don't have the ability to debate anymore. You dare have an opinion on certain topics and you are immediately shut down, but not on Dewbs & Co. That's what I say, which leads me nicely to tell you that I'm going to a break. When I come back, another topic that many people desperately try and silence, the criticism of religion. Do you think people should be able to criticise any religion, all religion, to whatever degree they so choose? Or do you think that there should be things like blasphemy laws? You tell me, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, as the cost of living crisis rages on, is it wrong to question the apocalyptic nature of BBC coverage? Star Daily Mail writer Stephen Glover faced a backlash after doing just that and questioning their, quote, favourite prophet of doom, Martin Lewis. He speaks out live. Plus, the man who helped establish Stonewall, former chair of the Tory campaign for homosexual equality, Paul Barnes, delivers home truths to the organisation on how it can save itself from extremists. And as ever, there's big opinions from Rod Liddell, Brendan O'Neill and my superstar panel, Daily Mail columnist Amanda Patel, entrepreneur and activist Adam Brooks and Sunday Mirror political editor Nigel Nelson. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Michelle Dewberry, keeping me company till 7 o'clock tonight. My panel, we have the columnist of the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, and author and academic Frank Furedi. Susan said, I am so angry with your guest views. I have followed the Russian war in Ukraine closely since February the 24th. The proposed visa ban is making ordinary Russians care now about the war in a way that they have not until now. The atrocities being carried out by Russians on Ukrainians are horrific beyond belief. We must do everything that we can to help Ukraine defeat Russia. She says, my Ukrainian guests are now here safely in my home. Lots of people very, very happy indeed that we are having the conversation, though, I have to say, about the Ukraine and Russian conflict, war, whatever you choose to call it. It does divide opinion, though, and, you know, it is, for me, a topic that we absolutely should discuss and continue to discuss it. We shall. Right, let's move on, shall we? We're all familiar now with what happened, the appalling attack on Salman Rushdie a few days ago in New York. There's an event happening very soon over in New York where writers will come together, read some of his passages out in solidarity, in a pushback against some censorship, etc., etc. I was going to read out, Frank, a whole long thing, but I just want to get to the point. Should we be able to criticise religion freely? Criticise religion?
Well, you know, free speech was born in reaction to blasphemy laws. When you look at the very concept of tolerance when it emerged precisely because people began to understand that it was important that people should be able to act in accordance, or at least think in accordance with their belief, and should have the right to begin to question blasphemy, a religion. And the problem that we have, as I see it, is that not only are we not allowed to criticize religion, and people seem to think that somehow that there's a line that you mustn't cross because of people's sensitivities, but we actually have blasphemy laws in a new form. And the new form of blasphemy laws that we have in the 21st century are laws to do with hate speech. So when you examine the way that hate speech is constructed as a crime and as a problem, it's actually analogous to the way in which old-fashioned heresy and blasphemy was perceived in the religious days. It's a kind of quasi-religious way of censoring the way we kind of operate. And it seems to me that unless we are free to express ourselves in relation to ideologies and in relation to religions, then free speech means nothing. Free speech only comes into its own when it's able to question unpopular views, when it's and put forward unpopular views. Free speech only comes into being when it's able to offend people. Because, as you know, there's never been a good idea that's ever been created by human beings in history that hasn't offended somebody. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been a good idea. And if we are going to have blasphemy laws, then what we're doing is we're undermining the intellectual and moral foundation on which a free society is built. And we have to remember one thing all the time, which is that free speech is a foundational freedom. Without free speech, none of our freedoms means anything, because unless we can give voice to our concerns, our freedom is going to be lost.
Peter?
Well, it is interesting, a point that Frank got halfway to making. The real religions which exist in the Western world today are those of man-made global warming, inequality and diversity. And heresy against either of those is increasingly difficult to express, and in many cases is punished by people losing their employment, which is the means of repression most effective probably in the world. It's much because no one really gets worked up about people losing their jobs. They get worked up about people being imprisoned or murdered for their opinions, but if they just lose their jobs, Amnesty International isn't going to intervene. The European Court of Human Rights isn't going to intervene either. People are just put under pressure to shut up. So there is a fair amount of heresy hunting going on already. In terms of religion, I am a Christian believer, and you can actually say anything you like about my religion, and I am enjoined by the scriptures not to hit you if you do that. I'm told to expect to be reviled for my beliefs, and I'm also told to turn the other cheek when attacked. And I have to say that turning the other cheek is of no value unless you have an alternative. But I won't attack you if you attack my religion, because I don't think that it would be, I think it would be wrong and it would be stupid. You can say what you like. On the other hand, if you want to have a debate about my religion, you'll get much further if you debate it rationally rather than by insulting me.
Can I just cut to the chase? It does feel to me a little bit like you're saying you can criticise my religion. Yeah. There does seem to be a challenge there, doesn't there? Let's be completely frank about this. That if you dare to criticise Islam, there will be many people that absolutely, completely do not think it is tolerable in any way, shape or form, and will feel vindicated in performing violence against you as a result. What do we think to this?
Well, we have to fight it, and we have to make sure that that kind of intolerance and the weaponization of a particular religion is not allowed to prevail. I think a lot of people have internalized this, and in a very cowardly way, are scared to actually criticize Islamism. I mean, you know, there's an example of the poor teacher from Batley who was teaching the children about Muhammad and drawing a cartoon about Muhammad. He's in hiding for a year, and he's in the same kind of predicament as Salman Rushdie is. And instead of society watching his back and really protecting him and allowing him to live a full life, we almost sweep to the side. We don't want to talk about this poor guy, because it raises all the important issues that in our society there are people that are prepared to commit crimes and terrorize people just simply because they've criticized or questioned their religion. And that seems to me to be intolerable. And that's got to be said loud and clear. You cannot have a democratic society if one group takes upon itself to have a monopoly or saying that my way of life, my religion is beyond discussion, beyond criticism.
No, but the reaction of the British state to the call for the murder of Salman Rushdie was to protect him. This was a man who'd been extraordinarily critical of Mrs. Thatcher herself. I think he described her as Madam Torture in one of his books, which was not the kind of thing which most people take kindly to. She nonetheless, the moment, as far as I recall, the fatwa was issued, ordered that he be protected with the full resources of the British state. I think that was absolutely and completely the right thing to do. Likewise, I think we can pretty much be sure that if anybody had attempted to attack him on British soil, then that person would have been subject to the full rigour of the law. There are limits on what a state can do about these things, but I think that actually the performance of this country in that matter is not entirely to be sneezed at.
I don't know. I think you're right in that instance. I was very unhappy the way that the situation in Batley was handled by the police, and the way in which the situation was created, the impression was created that somehow this teacher was equally guilty as the protesters against him. The kind of somehow that sort of plague on both sides. But you know, Peter, just because we kind of dealt properly with Salman Rushdie, we shouldn't forget the fact that a lot of people in high places kind of were wishing that Salman Rushdie did not exist. And I always recall and remember that when Salman Rushdie was knighted, Shirley Williams, who was a prominent Labour politician, basically said on TV that somehow this shouldn't be done because it kind of is an insult. Spending all this money and giving all this honor to Salman Rushdie for sending a negative signal.
Well, I think I was there when she said it. She didn't say quite that, but I mean, it's not necessarily a point of view with which I would agree or which I would wish to express. She was entitled to say it. The fact still remains that, as I say, the attitude of this country was to protect Salman Rushdie with all the resources at its command, and quite right too. I don't know what else exactly people propose that we should or could do in such matters. But this is important, and here we were, a country faced with a horrible thing, and we responded. As I say, I think that if people kill people for expressing their views, then the full rigour of the law needs to be applied to punish them for doing any such thing.
Well, we can begin.
That needs to be absolutely clear.
We can begin by educating our children.
Well, that would be a good start as well, wouldn't it?
It's perfectly all right to question everything, and it's perfectly all right for you and anybody else to have discussions about any religion. That's part of our culture. Instead of having RE, religious education lessons that avoid these kinds of difficult questions, I think we need to make our young people stronger and more willing to discuss and debate these kinds of controversial issues. In my university, people are wary, and this is in a university situation, are wary of openly discussing Islamic-related topics. Jihadist-related issues are almost forbidden. And you almost imagine that they've created a metaphorical trigger warning against any issues like that. And I think that when you have that kind of cowardly culture institutionalized, we do have a very big problem.
And I barely even remember, by the way, bringing it back to Batley, where were the teachers' unions? They can't help themselves at the moment, can they? Whether it's paying conditions when it was COVID, the threats from that. I don't remember them being very vocal at all when it came to the situation in Batley with that teacher. Maybe I missed that, but I doubt it. You tell me your thoughts on all of that. I was asking, do you think we should have blasphemy laws in this country? The short answer from pretty much everyone that's emailed in is a big fat no to that. We must have freedom of speech. People must be able to discuss pretty much whatever they want. I mean, we should all be free to discuss anything as respectfully, well, absolutely with respect. That's one thing, as I said earlier on in this programme, that is missing from society, if you ask me. We need more respectful conversation, not less. On that thought, I shall leave you. Thank you to my panel. Coming up, 7 o'clock, Nigel Farage. Good evening, Nigel. What have you got for us?
Good evening. What we've got is the most stunning piece of journalism, the best explanation of what's really going on those northern French beaches that has yet been produced. And I'll be showing this film and asking, is it maybe time we stop blaming the French and started to look at ourselves? All of that coming up in a moment, but first, the all-important and changeable weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. There has been some intense thundery activity across parts of Kent in particular through Wednesday. Those storms now easing. Drier for a time overnight as a ridge of high pressure moves in, but the next weather systems are queuing up to come in, this time from the Atlantic. They're going to bring some rain, but nowhere near as lively as the thunderstorms that we've seen over the last few days. So the last of the showers moving out of the way of the far south and southeast overnight. Still a legacy of cloud cover for East Anglia, parts of the Midlands, southern England. Scotland, Northern Ireland, as well as Northern England sees increasing cloud through the night and some outbreaks of rain towards the end of the night. But in between, a slice of clear spells, and under those clear spells, feeling fresh as we start off Thursday, temperatures at around 10 or 11 Celsius, where we've got the cloud, 15 or 16 Celsius. And many places will be cloudy first thing. It'll be a damp start for western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland as well. That rain then moving into northwest England, northern and west Wales, where it'll pep up for a time as well. 1 or 2 outbreaks of rain into Cornwall later. Ahead of that, actually after some early showers, sunny spells for the southeast and temperatures up to 27 Celsius with light winds, but feeling cool for Scotland, Northern Ireland and especially northern and western England and Wales where we've got those outbreaks of rain. The rain does spill southeastwards overnight. Again, some heavier bursts for a time, but eventually it's just an area of showers by the time it reaches East Anglia and the southeast, and not nearly as intense as those showers and thunderstorms many places have been hit by during the last few days. Clear spells otherwise overnight, and a warm night in the south, 15 to 18 Celsius. A fresh night for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, where there will be some showers first thing on Friday, those showers continuing through the day.